But first, U.S. intelligence says missiles have crossed into NATO member Poland, killing 2 civilians. President Biden has spoken on the phone with Poland's president about the situation. Biden offered full U.S. support in Poland's investigation. Ukraine's President Zelensky said this is a, quote, very significant escalation of the war and that action is needed. Chris Livesay is in Ukraine with more.
Poland has put its military on heightened readiness. It's a scenario we've always feared since the start of the war. What would happen if a nearby NATO ally were struck, either by accident or otherwise? Well, now we're about to find out. Tonight, in one of Russia's biggest missile strikes since the start of the war, 2 rockets landed outside Ukraine and in neighboring Poland, a NATO member, killing 2 civilians. It is unclear whether they were Russian rockets or Ukrainian air defense missiles. The blast occurred roughly 7 miles from the Ukraine border at a grain silo in the town of Przewodów. The Polish government held an emergency meeting, as did other nearby NATO countries, amid concerns about whether this could be considered an attack, triggering Article 5 of the NATO Charter. To fire missiles at NATO territory, this is a Russian missile attack on collective security, said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is a very significant escalation. We must act. In Ukraine, Russia fired more than 90 missiles around the country, most intercepted, others hitting residential buildings and plunging 10 million households into darkness after the electrical grid was targeted, Ukraine says. All of it believed to be an act of retaliation. 4 days ago, Moscow retreated from the critical city of Kherson. It's a double-edged sword, as one Ukrainian mayor tells me. Because it seems like every time there's a Ukrainian military victory, there's a retaliation against Ukrainian civilians.
Sure, they act like, injured dog. So they try to bite everyone after they get hit.
Russia has issued a statement denying it fired missiles near the Ukraine-Poland border and called it a, quote, deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation. John?
Chris Livesay in Ukraine. Thank you. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins me now from the Pentagon. David, what's the latest on this situation from the Pentagon point of view?
Well, we have 2 new statements from the Polish government. One from the Polish Foreign Ministry saying that the missile which landed in Poland was produced by Russia. Another from the president of Poland saying he has no definitive information on who fired that missile because, of course, Ukraine also uses Russian-made weapons. So you're left with a couple possibilities. One, there was a large missile barrage today, as you just heard, and one of those missiles could have gone astray and landed in Poland. The other possibility is that Ukraine was trying to shoot down those incoming missiles, and one of its anti-aircraft missiles went astray and landed in Poland, or else maybe hit an incoming Russian missile, and the debris landed in Poland. That doesn't solve the mystery, but it does seem to rule out the worst-case scenario, which would be a deliberate Russian attack on Poland. That, of course, would trigger the Article 5 provision of the NATO treaty. An attack on one is an attack on all, and President Biden has made some very definitive statements about what the U.S. would do to defend every inch, he says, of NATO territory. So right now, Poland is not invoking Article 5. What they're doing is mentioning Article 4, which is one step down, and basically says that when a country feels threatened, feels a threat to its sovereignty, it should consult with all the other members of NATO and figure out what to do. And that is exactly what's happening. They're having an emergency meeting of NATO ambassadors tomorrow. And, oh, by the way, there was a previously scheduled meeting of the ministers of defense for the roughly 50 countries who have been providing aid to Ukraine. That's a virtual meeting that was already scheduled to take place tomorrow. And between these two meetings, obviously one of the questions that's going to come up here is, do we need to provide Ukraine with more to defend themselves against Russia? Because whoever we find out actually fired that missile, the blame is surely going to fall on Russia, because all these missiles wouldn't be flying around if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine in the first place. Ukraine is asking for longer range missiles. They're asking for jet fighters, which so far the U.S. and the other NATO allies have not been willing to provide, because they're afraid it'll cross over one of Putin's red lines and lead to a wider war. But now that you have the war spilling over into Poland in any event, the calculations on what weapons to provide to Ukraine may change.
So if I can sum up what you said, David, it sounds like we may never know on the question of whether this was deliberate or anything, but at the very least, it was a messiness created by the conflict, and that may be a pretext for more U.S. aid, more support for Ukraine, and maybe answering yes to some of their requests that haven't already been said yes to. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, I think we'll know what happened, because there's debris at the explosion site, and that debris, and I mean the Polish government has already said it was Russian produced, but they're going to be serial numbers. Serial numbers can be traced, and I think at the end of the day we will probably know who fired that missile, but that's not going to change the blame game one bit.
Right. Well, all right, David Martin at the Pentagon. Thank you so much, David.
Sure.